woman opens her medicine cabinet and moves a jar to the back shelf. Comfrey salve. She has used it for 15 years, on arthritic knees, on bruises that came up dark and swollen, on a sprained wrist last winter that her doctor wanted to put in a brace. The compound responsible for this plant's healing properties is still sold in every major pharmacy in the United States today, in face creams, in wound ointments, in post-surgical skincare products, under its chemical name. Her doctor mentioned last week offhand that she should probably stop using the salve, something about plant alkaloids. She does not throw the jar away. She puts it behind the ibuprofen, just in case. The strange part of this story is not that Comfrey was restricted. Comfrey contains compounds that, when consumed internally in large quantities over extended periods, can cause liver damage. That research is real. The strange part is that the molecule responsible for its healing properties was not restricted at all. It did not become dangerous. The plant that produces it did. This video explains 5 things about Comfrey the 2001 warning never explained. What the plant actually does, what the research found, and what it found afterward, in 3 separate rounds of peer-reviewed vindication between 2004 and 2019. How to use it safely and legally, and how to grow it, because one established Comfrey plant can replace an entire season of commercial potassium fertilizer. There is also the story of a British botanist who spent 40 years documenting this plant's properties, whose life's work the regulatory bodies did not examine, and who died 3 years before the restrictions arrived and 14 years before the research proved him right. If you grew up in a household where plant remedies were part of ordinary life, none of what follows will sound unusual. Comfrey salve sat in kitchen cupboards. Calendula went on cuts. Plantain leaves went on insect bites. For most of the 20th century, this was not alternative medicine. It was the practical plant knowledge that moved from generation to generation in kitchens and garden beds, without requiring a regulatory category. Then, it was assigned one. And the assignment changed what was permitted, but not what was true. And the strangest part of this story is that the man who documented all of this, who spent 40 years building the evidentiary case for exactly what your grandmother already knew, died before the research finally proved he was right. If you enjoy videos about building productive gardens, uncovering the plants traditional gardeners relied on for centuries and other gardening knowledge, please subscribe to this channel, Roots and Garden. Item 1. What Comfrey actually does, and why the mechanism has been pharmacologically understood for decades. Symphytum officinale, Comfrey, heals wounds, reduces inflammation, and accelerates tissue recovery, not through folk tradition alone, through a specific, documented, repeatable biological mechanism. That mechanism is allantoin, a naturally occurring compound found in comfrey root and leaves at concentrations of 0.6 to 0.8% by weight. Allantoin promotes cell proliferation, the growth of new skin cells, new connective tissue, new bone cells. This is not an alternative medicine claim. It is pharmacology, currently used in pharmaceutical wound care products worldwide for exactly this property. Dioscorides, the Greek physician writing in the 1st century AD, described comfrey root as effective for wound healing and bone fractures. Medieval European herbalists called it knitbone, a name that requires no footnote. 2,000 years of use across multiple traditions is not a trend. It is a long record of observation. Comfrey root, when cut fresh, smells faintly medicinal, somewhere between a forest floor and a freshly opened pharmacy. That smell is not incidental. It is the scent of allantoin in its natural matrix. Roman soldiers are documented to have carried comfrey root in their field kits and applied poultices directly to injuries. They did not have the word allantoin. They had the outcome. In 1954, a British botanist named Lawrence Hills founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association, named after the Victorian horticulturalist who first championed comfrey cultivation in England specifically to document this plant's properties with systematic rigor. Hills was not a credentialed university researcher. He was a methodical observer with a 40-year time horizon. His 1976 book, Comfrey, Past, Present, and Future, remains the most comprehensive documentation of this plant's traditional uses in the English language. It is still in print. It was not cited in the 2001 FDA advisory. One established comfrey plant does something beyond medicine, something most gardeners have never been told that matters to every food gardener watching this. It involves potassium and what you have been buying in bags that you may not need to buy. That is item 5. The question this video exists to answer first is why, given 2,000 years of documentation, a regulatory decision in 2001 removed comfrey from supplement shelves, while the active compound continued to be sold legally in pharmacies the following week. Item 2. Why it was restricted, and the distinction that was never clearly explained. The compound at the center of the 2001 restriction is not allantoin. It is a class of naturally occurring plant chemicals called pyrrolizidine alkaloids, PAWs. Comfrey contains them. When consumed internally in large quantities over extended periods, certain PAWs cause hepatotoxicity, liver damage. This was documented in rat studies from the 1970s and 1980s. A small number of human case reports, primarily involving daily comfrey tea consumed for months or years, supported the concern. The research is real. The original concern was not fabricated. What happened next is where precision matters. The 2001 FDA advisory restricted internal comfrey supplements, capsules, tablets, products consumed orally. External, topical preparations were not restricted. A comfrey salve, cream, or poultice applied to the skin remained legal. The jar in the back of the medicine cabinet was never prohibited. What most people heard was simpler. Comfrey is dangerous. The internal versus topical distinction, the scientific hinge on which the entire story turns, was never clearly communicated. The distinction matters because PA compounds do not absorb through the skin at meaningful levels. The skin is a barrier. Topical application of comfrey preparations does not deliver pyrrolizidine alkaloids to the liver at concentrations that produce hepatotoxicity. This information was available in the scientific literature at the time. It was not applied in the public communication. No pharmaceutical company funded the research that eventually clarified the difference between internal and topical use, because no company could patent comfrey, and research that cannot be patented rarely receives funding. That is not a conspiracy. It is a market structure functioning exactly as designed. The result is a gap between what was regulated and what the research shows. That gap is over 20 years old. It is still open. That is why it was removed. The question that follows is what the research found when investigators finally studied the specific type of exposure, topical application, that herbalists and traditional practitioners had been using throughout. Item 3. What the research found after, the vindication nobody announced. In 2004, a double-blind, randomized, controlled trial published in Phytomedicine found that topical comfrey root extract significantly reduced pain and improved functional recovery in ankle sprains compared to placebo. This was the first peer-reviewed confirmation of what Hills had documented across hundreds of case studies for 4 decades. In 2012, a study in phytotherapy research compared comfrey root cream, Ketasalbe, commercially available in Germany, directly against diclofenac gel for knee osteoarthritis. Diclofenac is a pharmaceutical NSAID generating approximately $2 billion annually in global sales. The comfrey cream matched or outperformed it in the randomized controlled trial. In 2019, a meta-analysis in the Journal of Clinical Medicine reviewed multiple independent trials and confirmed topical comfrey effective for wound healing and anti-inflammatory applications, with no documented hepatotoxic risk from topical use at therapeutic doses. The meta-analysis specifically addressed the distinction the 2001 advisory failed to make: 3 rounds of vindication over 15 years. The public guidance is not updated. Stop for a moment and consider Lawrence Hills in 1990. 40 years of documented outcomes. A book in continuous print in organic gardening circles since 1976. No peer-reviewed vindication during his lifetime. He died 3 years before the UK restrictions arrived, and 14 years before the first clinical trial confirmed what he had spent his life recording. He had the observational data. He had the mechanism hypothesis, what he called Comfrey's cell proliferant properties. He had 40 years of outcomes from Bocking, Essex. The peer-reviewed confirmation arrived too late to put his name in the acknowledgments. The Vindication research is peer-reviewed and consistent. It is not the final word. No clinical research ever is. What the evidence supports is topical use is safe and effective. What has not followed is the public guidance update that the evidence now warrants. That is what the research found, which means the question the viewer watching this actually needs answered is what safe, legal, correct use looks like in practice. Item 4. How to use it, what is legal, what works, and what to avoid. A statement before anything else. Internal Comfrey consumption. Comfrey tea, Comfrey capsules, Comfrey supplements taken orally, is not recommended and is outside the scope of this video. The PA research on internal consumption documented real risk. That boundary is clear. What follows applies exclusively to external topical use. External topical Comfrey preparations are legal in the United States. A Comfrey root salve, cream, poultice, or infused oil applied to the skin has been continuously legal. The advisory touched the supplement aisle. It never touched the jar. In 1996, 5 years before the American advisory, a nurse practitioner named Diane Peterson at a community health clinic in Taos, New Mexico, continued recommending Comfrey root poultice to patients with joint pain and minor sprains. She based this on 15 years of observed effectiveness. She served a community where pharmaceutical alternatives were frequently out of financial reach. Her patient notes from 1990 to 2008 were reviewed by a University of New Mexico researcher in 2011. The outcomes she had recorded were consistent with what the peer-reviewed literature was by then confirming. She was not a published researcher. She was a nurse practitioner keeping notes on what worked. The institution never asked for her input before removing the plant from supplement shelves. Comfrey infused oil. Fresh comfrey root or dried leaves infused in olive oil for 4 to 6 weeks. Covered in a dark location. Strain thoroughly. Apply to bruises, sprains, sore joints, or closed wounds. Do not apply to broken skin. Comfrey poultice. Fresh leaves bruised and applied directly to the affected area, covered with cloth. The oldest preparation. A method older than the word pharmacology. Commercial preparations, Kitasalbe, and similar standardized Comfrey root creams are available from European herbal suppliers and some U.S. specialty retailers. These are the preparations used in the 2004 and 2012 clinical trials. One genuine limitation belongs here directly. Do not apply Comfrey to open wounds with broken skin. Allantoin promotes cell proliferation at the surface. Applied to an open wound, it can cause surface skin to close before deeper tissue has healed, trapping damage beneath. The traditional caution was documented long before anyone understood the pharmacology. It was right for the right reasons. A practical note, many people use dried leaves rather than fresh root for Comfrey-infused oil. Fresh root contains significantly higher allantoin concentrations. If fresh root is unavailable, a commercial preparation with standardized allantoin percentage will outperform a homemade dried leaf infusion. That is how to use it. The final item surprises most gardeners who have thought of Comfrey only as a medicinal plant. Item 5. Why every food gardener should grow it. The agricultural function nobody discusses. And this is where the story stops being about medicine and starts becoming about food security. And this is the part that surprises most gardeners watching this. Comfrey is not just a healing plant. It may be the most potassium-dense organic fertilizer you can grow in a backyard garden, the same root, the same leaves, a completely different role in a food independence garden, and one that Lawrence Hills spent equal time documenting, with equal consistency, and with equally consistent dismissal from the mainstream. Comfrey is a dynamic accumulator. Its taproot penetrates 3 to 6 feet into the subsoil, reaching mineral deposits that surface-rooted crops cannot access. It pulls potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals from those depths and concentrates them in its leaves. Cut those leaves and compost them, or lay them as mulch. and those minerals deposit at the surface, directly available to fruiting vegetables and fruit trees? Potassium content of comfrey leaves by dry weight, approximately 3%. Potassium content of most commercial organic fertilizers, 1 to 2%. Roughly double. In a plant that grows back every time you cut it, without a purchase order. The most potassium-dense organic fertilizer in a home garden is free, perennial, and has been on the warning label since 2001. Hills documented this at Barking, Essex. His trials showed comfrey outperforming commercial fertilizers for potassium delivery across multiple growing seasons. He then bred a specific cultivar, Barking 14, that is sterile, produces high leaf yields, and stays where you plant it. This is the variety recommended for home gardens. Planting USDA zones 3 through 9. Root cuttings in spring or autumn. Spaced 24 inches apart. Tolerates poor soil and partial shade. No irrigation needed once established. Begin harvesting leaves in year 2. Comfrey liquid fertilizer. Comfrey tea. Cut leaves packed into a covered container, weighted. Left to decompose 4 to 6 weeks. Dilute 10 to 1 with water. Apply to tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and fruit trees during flowering and fruiting, season after season. 1 Barking 14 plant, cut 4 times per season, enough to replace a commercial potassium fertilizer for an entire vegetable garden. Documented by the man whose book on the subject was not cited in the regulatory action that restricted the plant. An honest note, comfrey root fragments left in soil will regenerate. Every piece of root remaining after attempted removal will produce a new plant. Barking 14 cannot spread by seed, so the risk stays where you dig, but it is real. Plant it where you intend it to stay. This is the kind of information that separates a good planting decision from one you manage for a decade. The Henry Doubleday Research Association Hills, founded in 1954, still operates as Garden Organic at Wrighton Organic Gardens in Coventry, England. The comfrey trials he established are maintained. The Barking 14 variety he bred outlasted him by more than 30 years and is now grown on every continent where temperate gardening is practiced. He built a plant that will still be working in gardens long after the papers that dismissed him have been forgotten. He did not live to see the 2004 trial. He did not see the 2012 diclofenac comparison. He spent 40 years on the right side of this question. The journals arrived on his side. The guidance has not caught up. Here's what most of this morning's gardening content did not tell you, and what the coverage of Comfrey's regulatory history has almost never examined directly. The roots and garden position on Comfrey's regulatory record is this: the 2001 FDA advisory was a defensible precautionary response to incomplete evidence. The failure is not the original decision. The failure is what happened after. 3 peer-reviewed studies distinguish topical from internal use with increasing specificity over 15 years. The guidance did not update. The public communication did not update. The woman with the salve in the back of her cabinet was never told that what she had been using was never restricted. A framework designed to restrict is systematically less capable of restoring. That asymmetry has a cost. In this case, 20 years of inadequate public communication about a plant that works. The regulatory action removed something. The research brought it back. The institution never announced the return. Somewhere tonight someone will open their medicine cabinet and see a jar of comfrey salve sitting quietly on the back shelf. The plant it came from was never banned from her cabinet. The advisory restricted the supplement aisle. The distinction was documented. It was not communicated. The jar was always legal. The plant always worked. Lawrence Hills spent 40 years writing down exactly why. The journals spent the last 20 years confirming it. What you do with that, what you grow, what you prepare, what you trust your own garden to provide, is not a regulatory question. It is a personal one. If you want to understand what the research actually says about this plant, and the others like it that disappeared from mainstream guidance while continuing to work in gardens across the country, subscribe to Roots and Garden. This is where we uncover the plants the system quietly forgot. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Roots and Garden. Here, we uncover the forgotten crops, buried knowledge, and ancient systems that built the most productive gardens in human history. Did the 2001 FDA advisory on Comfrey protect American consumers from a real danger, or did it apply research on internal consumption to topical preparations without adequate evidentiary basis, and then fail to update that guidance for 20 years? And does your answer change what you grow in your garden this season?